So you've been in the market for a relatively inexpensive ATX mid-tower case, but a lot of the options on the market might seem a little underwhelming. You're looking for something classy yet subtle and modest with decent hardware support. Something with substance. Something with a little more meat. A Meteor case. Rosewill's recently launched Meteor XR Plus gaming case is a mid-sized tower made primarily of steel and plastic, coming in at 489 by 210 by 438 millimeters. That is 19.26 by 8.27 by 17.25 inches and about 7 kilograms or 15.6 pounds. Around the top, we have a power button that lights up in blue, accompanied by a reset button laid within a neat angular design, a glossy black and matte black plastic converging together with a red accent that extends down the side and turns into this kind of half honeycomb pattern. Sweet. Side I/O consists of two USB 3.0 ports sandwiching headphone and microphone jacks, and an HDMI port for your VR needs. It's nice to see more and more cases implementing things like this. Now we just have to wait on USB Type-C. Continuing along the side, we see a slightly tinted tempered glass panel using the standard 4-thumb screw mounting method, with generous rubber dampeners and black borders to hide some of the case's frame. The front panel, removable by yanking the bottom, is made of plastic but sports a brushed aluminum design, and if you thought meteors made the dinosaurs go extinct, well, you'd be wrong, because we see a lone 5¼ inch drive bay hanging out right up top. And finally, we've got the red hard drive indicator LED sitting around the bottom. Inside the chassis, you'll find a whole lot of white for this particular model, and a decent number of cutouts, though only the bottom one sports a rubber grommet. There's a basement that you can hide in the event of a meteor shower, with 7 expansion slots right above it. This outer space case fits micro ATX and ATX motherboard form factors and has room for graphics cards up to 360mm in length and CPU coolers up to 160mm tall. The case includes two toolless 3.5-inch drive sleds, both of which can fit 2.5-inch SSDs, as well as two SSD caddies that can be mounted either behind the motherboard tray, which does have a pretty generous cutout for cooler installations, or on the top of the basement. Considering meteors can get pretty hot, Rosewill has made sure to include plenty of cooling support. The front can fit up to 3 120s or two 140mm fans with support for a 240 or 280 rad. If you remove the 5¼ inch drive bay, you can actually get a 360 to round off your rock. The top accommodates two 120s or two 140mm fans or a 240 or 280 rad, again with the drive bay omitted. And finally, the Meteor's tail supports a 120 with a red LED fan pre-installed in the back and another non-LED 120 included in the bottom front for intake. To help prevent the buildup of space dust, you get a magnetic filter for the top and this awful thing for the bottom, but nothing for the front. At least the 4 plastic feet give your power supply adequate breathing room. In space, no one can hear you scream. But we're on Earth last I checked, so let's hear this thing shriek. If at all. Thermal testing is going to be a bit extensive here. If you take a good look, the front has virtually no intake. Upon first glance, you'd assume this honeycomb pattern could be used for some airflow, but they are strictly for aesthetics, which means the only ventilation on the front of the chassis is through the opening on the bottom used for removing the panel. That being said, with ambient temperature normalized to 25 degrees Celsius and the fans left in their default position spinning at full speed, running Prime 95 on my Xeon 2690 V3 processor at 1.3 volts cooled by the Be Quiet Dark Rock Pro 3 cooler with RPM locked at 1000, and for Mark to abuse my Zotac GTX 980 Ti Amp Extreme graphics card with the fans kept at 1500 RPM with the front panel off, we see the processor's average temperature land around 81.17 degrees Celsius while the GPU reached 65. Putting the front panel back on, we observe the processor shoot up to 86.58 and the graphics card lands at a sad 79. Moving the fan up to be in line with the CPU cooler gave 92.25 and 80 degrees Celsius respectively for processor and graphics, likely due to the fact that there's nowhere to pull air from. Switching intake to top, we see temperatures come in at 93 and 80. With top and rear exhaust and no intake, we see 87.92 and 74 degrees Celsius respectively. Now that that's all done and space dusted, building in the case wasn't too shabby. The back left enough cable management room for me, and the number of tie-down points was adequate in my opinion. The thumb screws weren't over-tightened out of the factory, so I didn't find my fingers bleeding all over the steel during the initial build. That's always good. The motherboard tray cutout for the CPU is really generous, and it doesn't seem to affect the case's structural integrity. The outside of the case has a really simple appearance from your main viewing angle, while being a little more bold on the other side, which mixes well if you're into red and black color schemes. Lastly, the top dust filter feels like really smooth. It's actually a lot of fun to touch. Now, where exactly does this meteor come crashing down? Standoffs don't come pre-installed, which is a small convenience I would have liked to see. I kind of wish there was another cutout in the basement for the front I/O audio cable and for the second SSD spot, just in case you wanted to put both trays in the main chamber, as well as an additional one closer to the side panel for your PCIe power cables. The basement cutout for front intake is a bit thin if you plan on running a radiator, so push-pull configurations definitely won't work there. Rubber grommets for the top cutouts would have been appreciated, but those are the ones that draw the least amount of attention, so that's not as big of an issue for me. The HDMI VR pass-through cable has no good way to go around to the rear of the case unless you utilize an expansion cover, which does need to be snapped off, so you'll want to take that into consideration if your graphics card doesn't have a port for that towards its front. The front of the case has no dust filter, and the filter for the power supply has that awful kind of bend it to get it off method, and nobody likes that. As for the case's aesthetics, it's tough to say. I'm not a fan of the black, white, and red here. It kind of reminds me of a burnt strawberry shortcake, and that's just cruel. Though, Rosewill does have a black version with the same red accent, and I think that one looks way better. Another thing I'd like to pick at is the 5¼ inch drive bay. While I don't mind that it's there, I just wish it had the same brushed aluminum look as the rest of the panel for continuity, since the matte black plastic actually kind of stands out. And finally, while the front panel has that brushed aluminum look, you can still tell it's plastic as it's not particularly convincing. A couple of other things to note, the front I/O is connected to the front panel, so removing it still leaves you tethered to the main chassis. The last thing I've got is if you remove the hard drive bay, you have what looks like a spot to mount a pump. I've never had the opportunity to do any fancy water cooling, so I'm not 100% positive on this, but if that's the case, it seems like a pretty restricting spot. All that being said, for $80 US, it's competing with cases like the Phanteks P400, which I never reviewed, so I can't give a good comparison between the two. But the case looks pretty good if you go with the black variant. The white and black version isn't my favorite, but that's subjective and you may feel differently. However, to its credit, with the lights off, that red glow makes it look pretty ominous. The tempered glass doesn't sit flush with the front panel, but because of the slightly angular approach, it still looks pretty good to me. Building it was really friendly, so I doubt you'll run into any issues if you decide to pick this one up. Really, go ahead and pick it up. It's pretty light for a Meteor. But then again, maybe not. Just as Meteors come in hot, so does this case. So if you plan on doing any overclocking, you may want to look elsewhere. Though, if you do settle on this one and you stick with the stock fans, they're pretty darn quiet. And as a nice bonus, they put that protective plastic on both sides of the glass, so peeling is twice as fun.
Oh, people are gonna make fun of me for that.
So that's all I have to say about that. Like, dislike, let me know if you think this case is out of this world or just outrageous. Subscribe, share, leave me questions if you've got them. Thanks for watching. My name is Steven and I am ALittleDIMM. Bye bye. Something with substance. Something with a little more meat. A Meteor case. It's... What? You're looking for something classy yet subtle and modest, with a decent Nope, but a lot of the options might seem a little underwhelming. You're looking for a relatively that's not what I wrote, coming in at 489 by 210 by 438 millimeters, damn it. A glossy black and matte black. We see a slightly tinted tempered glass panel using the 4 standard thumb screw mounting with generous rubber dampeners and black borders to hide some of the chassis. Not cases, not chassis, chassis. That's good. And if you thought meteors made the dinosaurs go extinct, well, you'd be wrong, because we see a lone 5¼ And finally, we've got the red hard drive indicator. Switching intake to top, we see, yeah, the outside of the case has a really simple? Yeah, really simple. Just like me. So you'll want to take that into consideration if your graphics card doesn't have a port that's since the matte black plastic, while the front panel has that brushed aluminum. I've never had the opportunity to do any yeah.